that button. Awesome. Alrighty, I'm Paige. I'm an alcoholic. Welcome, everyone. So where we're picking up today is on page 96, and we're in the second full paragraph. And where we've been is the chapter Working with Others, speaking about step 12. And last week, a lot of what we were talking about is like, what do we do if the person that we're carrying the message to doesn't want it, or is resistant, or isn't open? And the thrust of what we were talking about is that we give them the dignity of their own experience. I keep my hand out, but if they don't want to do it, my job isn't to force them to do it. And I think I said this when we started last week, but I also want to talk about how I work with others and how I sponsor others and take them through the steps. It's intensive. I will say it does say intensive work with others. That's the key. So it's like, oh girl, you are intensive. Yeah, that's the point. But also, if what you are doing is working, and I do things in a way that's a little different than you, but what you are doing is working. The people that you are working with are getting sober, they're doing the work, and what you're doing is working. Keep doing that. Don't listen to me. Do what works. I was talking a lot about how my sponsorship style has changed over the years because what I was doing wasn't working. And I didn't willy-nilly throw like spaghetti at the wall. I saw that people would get stalled out on step 4. And so I was like, well, how can I help them with that? You know, that's what happens. So it's okay if what you're doing is working and it's different than how I do it. I always want to emphasize that. It's okay. You're okay. But if it's not working, you're okay to try some of this and adapt and seek to understand. So I'm always big on approaching with compassion and approaching with curiosity, because that will usually lead me in a direction that we can work together. Anywho, 96, second full paragraph. Suppose you are now making your second visit to a man. And keep in mind, we laid down the foundation for steps 1 and 2 and 3 in that full one meeting. So again, it doesn't take long to get well. It doesn't take long to do this thing, to have a spiritual experience. Welcome, guys. We're on page 96, second full paragraph, right where we started, because I move at that pace. Glad you're here. It says he has read this volume and is prepared to go through with the 12 steps of the program of recovery. And last week I was talking about, here's my experience. I like to read the book with them. I like to take them through the book together so that we can have an experience together. Because, I don't know, for me, this book was not, I don't like reading it on my own. I love reading it, but I don't read it. Even today, I don't read this thing on my own. And I read it with somebody else, which makes it not a textbook. And it is a textbook, but it makes it an experience. You know, there's something incredible when we come and we sit together and we go through this book together. There's always something new. And some of you guys are well aware of the big book elves or the big book fairies that come in and sprinkle in new information that wasn't there the last billion times we read it, right? And that's what's so incredible about this. So I often will read with them through the book and that line by line experience. And the reason I do that is because when I do that, my sponsees, the people I work with, they are often then more comfortable and able to sponsor others. And to do so in a way that's flexible. I've worked with a lot of people where they had gone through a set of steps but didn't know how to work with others, and that's why they came and asked me for help. And that line-by-line experience creates that flexibility. And of course, there's times where we don't got time. They're not going to stay sober the week, so we go back and we do the reading after. So I'm throwing all of that at you, and I know of some wonderful, amazing AA members that are like, I just don't have the time. So they would give Joe and Charlie's. And as we were talking about right before the meeting, these studies are recorded and we can utilize these to help people. I can't remember where I went, but I remember I was out of town and I was working with a sponsee every single day. And I'm like, and I can't remember why, but for some reason I wasn't going to be able to meet her. And she was trucking along with the recordings, and she's like, no, I'm good, I got it. I'm like, that is the most efficient sponsorship I've ever done. I wasn't even there. She got through like some of the step 1 stuff and it was great. We were like, inventory we go. So the second visit. So all of that 1, 2, 3 happened in the laying down the foundation, the information in the first visit. And so this prospect has made this their third step decision, because it says he has read this volume and says he is prepared to go through with the 12 steps of the program of recovery. That's what the third step decision is. It is a decision to work these 12 steps as outlined in this book as a way of life. And I always add, like my life depends on it, because it does. That's what the decision is. And it says, having had the experience yourself, you can give him much practical advice. So I'm helping this person go through the steps based on my experience. Again, this is why I am so big on these steps are not for me a set it and forget it program. It's not a thing that I did a couple of years ago. It is how I live my life. And I know what it's like. Man, I know what it's like to deal with me. You got something that pops up in your life and I'm like, let's do inventory. Oh, yeah, Paul knows. Paul knows. And poor Eileen, she knows too. Oh, it's an ordeal for these guys. And I know where it's like, I don't want to do inventory, or those moments where it's like, oh, I don't want to make an amends, or I don't want to pray, or I don't want to do my evening review, or I don't want to meditate. That's okay. But do it anyways. But also the reason I do this work is in part because it allows me to deepen the experience, to deepen the spiritual experience, to deepen the spiritual awakening. And I can't stay well on one, but also, and just as importantly, my very life depends on showing you how I have recovered. I need to be adept and skilled and honed at inventory, honed at amends, honed at prayer and meditation, and practicing these things. So the more that I do, the more that I'm able to share with you. It is not a begrudging I have to, it is I get to, that allows me to be more effective, to be more efficient, and to be more useful to God and the people about me, which is so awesome, because it's way better than this sucks and everything sucks and I don't want to do it. And it's okay if that's how I do it, as long as I do it. So it says, and welcome those that just joined us. We're on page 96, first full paragraph, where we started. 96, first full paragraph. You haven't missed much. Or not second paragraph. Sorry guys, second paragraph. So it says, let him know if you're available, if he wishes to make a decision. That's step 3. The decision to work these 12 steps is a way of life, like our life depends on it, because it does, and tell his story. Step 5. But do not insist upon it if he prefers to consult somebody else. Now, if you've been hanging with us as we've been going through this book, you'll remember that when we were into action and we were talking about step 5, we bounced over to this paragraph because we were like, who should we do our 5th step with? And I'm like, let's go here first. And so what it's saying is that I'm making myself available as their sponsor. Again, that word is not used in the first 164 pages, but the job description is all over it. And I just use that word because you know what I mean when I use it. So as their sponsor, I'm making myself available to receive their 5th step if they're open. So when I'm coming up to step 5 and I'm like, who should I do my 5th step with? My sponsor is the first person that I should go down the list and consider and see if I'm open. And probably one of the best people to do it with, because that's going to help the relationship. It's going to help as I get navigating through amends. They're going to have a lens as to what are my defects of character? What are my patterns? It's just going to be really helpful. And because they're an alcoholic, spoilers, they've already done it. It's like that deep, dark secret I don't want to tell another human being. And I'm like, I did that last Tuesday, we are not alone. So we make ourselves available. It goes on to say, but do not insist upon it if he prefers to consult somebody else. So we're making ourselves available. He may be broke and homeless. If he is, you might try to help him about getting a job or giving him a little financial assistance. Now, this is one of the parts of the book where it's like, what? I got some sponsees that are like, I would like a loan, Paige. No. Again, let's talk about the context. There is a time and a place. And I will say, financial assistance, I can tell you, like, almost never has there been a time where it has been appropriate for me to give financial assistance. I can remember one time, and there might have been a couple more, but never will I lend any money to sponsees. And here's why. One is, listen, if a sponsee's borrowing money, they're not in good shape. I'm not going to get it back. But more importantly is that if somebody borrows money, then that creates a change in the dynamic of the relationship. And they won't come to me for help if they feel ashamed that they owe me money. But I have given money very, very rarely. One time is I had a sponsee who was just not well, mental health stuff, physical health stuff. And the sponsee reached out to me and I'm like, I don't know what you should do. Like, I think maybe you should go to the hospital. And the sponsee went to the hospital and the hospital was no help and called me after like 2 or 3 in the morning, broken and dejected and hurt and like feeling those feelings of rejection. And there's no trains or transit that's running. And I gave her money for an Uber. Like that's an example of where it's like, it's different. It's different. Now that's really the thrust of what we're going to be talking about in the next few pages. How do I help the alcoholic without creating false dependencies? Because I do not want the alcoholic to be dependent upon me. Because I was going to say I suck. That's a little too extreme. But I am a human power. I don't have the ability to keep anyone sober. My job is to take their hand and put it in God's hands. So, but again, the context is this book was written 1937, 1938, published in 1939. The United States was in the thrust of the Great Depression. There were not social safety nets. We did not have some of the resources that are available to us today. And at many times nowadays, we're meeting people at meetings. But back in the day, we were finding those street level drunks. And we might have needed to provide them a little bit of shelter so that they could begin to get a foundation. So it says, he may be broke and homeless. If he is, you might try to help him about getting a job or give him a little financial assistance. But, so it's like this is something you can do, but it is held with this but. That but is important. But you should not deprive your family or creditors of money they should have. So it's going to give us an option and then like a criteria to hold ourselves up to. It goes on to say, perhaps you will want to take the man into your home for a few days. Here's the but be sure you use discretion. Be certain that he will be welcomed by your be sure he will be welcomed by your family, that he is not trying to impose upon you for money, connections, or shelter. So first of all, if we're going to have a drunk stay over, run that by the fam jam. They like to have a say in those sorts of things. And I will say, as somebody who's brought home puking street drunks, just like me, back when I was puking and a street drunk, that part of my continuing amends is not doing that anymore. Hey, guess who we got? No. But I do have friends, and I don't live by myself, so I don't have people that live and stay over. But I do have friends that have had people stay in their home. And both parties, both people were sober members of Alcoholics Anonymous and discussed it and talked about it. And they were strong 12-step members with good boundaries. But most of the time, no. Or most of the time, let's run that idea by our sponsor. If we're like, I'll take them in. I'll scoop them up. Let's just let's just run by our sponsor. Because I, not you guys, but this alcoholic also is raging codependency. I know, you guys can't relate. And when I see a little drunk, I just love them. I just love them. And I want to scoop them up and I want to fix them and I want to save them and I want to be the one to do it. And I don't always use discernment. And that's why it's always good to have another set of eyes and ears on this thing. So, and this is what's important. When it says, be certain he will be welcomed by your family, obviously, and that he's not trying to impose upon you for money, connections, or shelter. Permit that and you only harm him. If I allow somebody to be dependent upon me, I'm harming them. It's harming them. And that's something I can get behind. And here's why. It says you will be making it possible for him to be insincere. You may be aiding in his destruction rather than in his recovery. And bear with me, I'm going to paint a picture. And maybe it's a picture that's intimately familiar for a lot of you guys. So an alcoholic gets sober and has a plan. Listen, if an alcoholic has a plan, oh no. And those are the ones, do not lend them money. You're not getting that back. They got a plan. So the alcoholic sobers up and they got a plan, a PLAN plan. And it involves, I got to go do this and I got to go do that and I got to get a job and I got to get my spouse back and I'm going to do this and this and this and this. And that's not my job. My job is not to acquiesce to the plan. My job is to take them through the 12 steps so that they can live a life that is surrendered to a higher plan, a deeper plan, a plan that is going to work. And then they can show up to any and every area of their life, sober and contented and peaceful and useful, even under the most trying of circumstances. But I know what it's like when I first started sponsoring people. That desire to be like, no, Paige, you don't understand. I need a job. And that desire, and I never did this, but I had that feeling in my heart like, okay, maybe I'll help you find a job. I didn't. That's not my job. But I get that. And it's saying, at this point, that's not what we're doing. But there might be times where we help them find a job. There might be times where we help them out. And that's what we're going to talk about later. But because I'm on it now and I don't want to forget, I'm going to make sure I tell you, it's usually after they've done the steps and they're working with others. That's how we know when we're doing that heart-centered giving versus that codependent trying to carry them. You know, if somebody is clamoring for this or that, I need this, I need that, and it's like, okay, I'll give you those things. Now can we do inventory? That's the wrong order. It's like, give them God. Higher power, creator, spirit of the universe, because that is what I need. And when I have that, everything will fall into place. I spent a lot of time at a meeting pre-COVID, and I mean post-COVID too, like for a number of years. But pre-COVID, we would get it was a women's meeting, and we would get a bunch of women from the local, one of the closest female rehab, the local women's treatment center. And that was the predominant attendance at that meeting. And I can't tell you how it was like almost every week, somebody would be like, I'm graduating and I don't know where I'm going to end up and I don't know where I'm going to live. And I will tell you that every single woman that graduated out of that program, that stayed sober at least a little bit, landed somewhere safe. They ended up with housing. I don't know how. I didn't do it, and then to do with it. But those that didn't, And who keeps me sober? What keeps me sober? Nothing less than a spiritual experience. Nothing less than a spiritual experience that I grow and that I deepen for the rest of my life. I can't stay sober on one drink. I can't stay well on one drink. I can't stay sober on one spiritual experience. That's what keeps me sober. The 12 steps are what brings about that spiritual experience. And if I get that, then everything else falls into place. And if I don't have that, it doesn't matter the job, the relationship, the car, the house, the status, the whatever, it's all gonna fall apart. I got the muscles to go to the gym. It's all gonna fall apart because I will drink again. And so that's the order. That's the order. And so I love this part of the book because we really sort of enter into this non-dual consciousness where two things are true. And we see that in the later chapters. That's why I have such a love for them. Where one thing is true is like, we do not want to codepend, and we do not want them to rely upon us. But if help is warranted, I will do anything and everything I can to help. And that's that, where two things are true. So it says, never avoid these responsibilities, but be sure you are doing the right thing if you assume them. So we're not just saying, no, that's not my business, but making sure that we are aligned. We're aligned. The helper is aligned with God's will. And that order of help them get to their spiritual awakening first. And it says, helping others is the foundation stone of your recovery. That is an important line. The foundation of my recovery is not steps 1, 2, 3. The foundation of my recovery is helping others. And as much as it's important to get involved in service and chair meetings and make the coffee and answer the phones, and it is, and that's so important. But the helping others that we are specifically talking about is taking other people through the 12 steps. That is my foundation. And if I'm not there, that's okay. You're not bad. You're not wrong. You're not a bad AA. But if I'm not there, I don't have a foundation. And we've got to get there. That's what I need. That is my foundation. So helping others is the foundation stone of our recovery. And I also emphasize, if I don't have a foundation, there is no ground. And if there is no ground, what that means is I'm in free fall. And if I'm in free fall, it's not a matter of if I drink again. It is a matter of when I drink again. Nothing less than all 12 steps and I will relapse. So that is our foundation. A kindly act wasn't once in a while isn't enough, which is rude, because these kindly acts, whoa, what do you mean? You're going to ask for daily action? That seems a little much. And it says, you have to act the Good Samaritan every day, if need be. Yeah. Every day I've got to show up and be of service. And I promise, man, it's one of those things, like genuinely, when life is on me and I'm in pain and I'm hurting and it's like, I feel like nobody loves me. I feel like nobody gives a patootie about me. I wasn't sure what word I was going to use. It wasn't going to be a swear, but I was surprised patootie came out. But nobody cares about me. Nobody likes me. I'm worthless. I suck. What I think I need is for you to validate me. But even if I get it, it doesn't last. And I don't really believe you when I'm in that state. I'm like, you're just saying that because you don't want me to end up in the grippy sock place. But when I give that which I do not feel I have, that's when I awaken. When I feel like I am unloved, go give love. Go be love. I do a study with Terry on Fridays, and he talks about being a joy bringer. When I feel miserable, bring joy to others. When I feel unlovable, love others. When I feel unwanted, include others. When I feel worthless, tell people how worthy they are. Show people how worthy they are. And what happens is that if I do that on a daily basis, everything in my life will change. Now, it's interesting about the story of the Good Samaritan. Now, I am not an intellectual, and so if I get parts of this wrong, I always like to say I don't stand much, but I always stand to be corrected. But if I get some of this wrong, feel free to correct me. But the story of the Good Samaritan is a parable, which is a story that is meant to convey a meaning. And the parable of the Good Samaritan is there was in ancient, I believe it comes from the, I was going to say first edition. That's not how that works. I think it's an Old Testament story. I can be corrected if I'm wrong. But it's a story, thank you, not the first edition. That's we can tell I got to focus and it's the big book. It's a first edition story. No. But it was a story of this Jewish man who was badly hurt and badly injured on the side of the road. Now, at that time in history, the Jewish people and the Samaritans were bitter enemies, and they were at war. and he's injured on the side of the road, and a number of like his people walk by and ignore him and don't help him, and you're on your own there, buddy. Actually, this is not how the story goes, but in my mind, it's like, just 90 meetings in 90 days, and they walk by, and then it's like, just don't drink and go to meetings, and they, walk by, and it's like, play the tape. They're not actually offering any help. But then who comes by is a Samaritan. And the Samaritan, and actually I'm somebody that I really like art, which is probably not surprising. It's like arts and birds and the dictionary. Listen, when I was out there doing what I was doing, I thought I was a big toughie, and I'm like, I'm doing it. I'm homeless. I'm living on the streets. I'm behind the dumpster. Like, I'm hanging out with these like people that aren't doing nice things, and I'm a toughie. And I'm like, I actually find art history incredibly interesting. But there's paintings of the Good Samaritan, and so it is. There's a bunch of paintings of them, but one of the things that I find most interesting is of most of the paintings of the Good Samaritan is there's a level of real intimacy, where the Samaritan, who is the bitter enemy of the injured man, is physically picking him up and putting him on like a mule or a donkey, and there's a closeness and an intimacy. And the parable, the meaning, or at least the one that I can glean from it, is the idea that is those who are the least likely to be able to help are the ones that help. So as an alcoholic, I mean, we're riddled with selfishness, self-centeredness. Me, I'm not big on music, so I don't really go to operas, but I am quite familiar with the alcoholic opera. Me. That one I'm familiar with. Sung that one a time or two. But to get there and to be there in that place of intimacy and vulnerability, I'm not just going to be like, okay, you go do that. I'm going to come with you. And I'm going to take this path, and I'm going to take this journey with you. And I need to do that every day, if need be. Every day, to walk this journey, to walk this path with you. That's what we do. And we're the ones that are least likely to help. Doctors, psychologists, psychiatrists, some of the most famous and well-learned and studied people in the world, and they do help. But when it comes to alcoholism, not like another drunk who's gone through the steps. Man, we help at a level and a depth and a way that nobody else can. And what a gift. What a gift it is to be the Good Samaritan in this case. And then what follows, Howard calls them the 12 inconveniences, and he calls it that. I've recently stolen that from him. I love that, because what I know to be true is that I need to be inconvenienced. I always tell people, if you're not inconvenienced, you don't have enough sponsees, or we're not working with our sponsees intensively enough. I gotta be at least a little bit inconvenienced. And part of the reason is because I don't know what's good for me. I think the inconvenience level should be none, should be zero, no inconvenience. I am busy with birds in the dictionary and art. I'm such a weirdo. And the truth is, no, I need to be inconvenienced. I need to be pushed outside of my comfort zone. And I also love this, because Bill Wilson is giving us the harsh realities of working with others. There are times it will be inconvenient, and that doesn't mean you're doing it wrong. So it says, it may mean the loss of many nights' sleep. And I will say, those 3 a.m. calls, typically it's like, girl, go to bed. Go to bed. It's 3 a.m., go to bed. That's genuinely, and I'm not even being glib. It's like usually whether they're drunk at 3 a.m. or they're up at 3 a.m. and suicidal, it's like, what will help more than anything else is go the F to sleep. There's a book that's of that title. Go to bed. But it may mean the loss of many nights' sleep, great interference with your pleasures, interruptions to your business. So there are times I'm going to have to help people when it is inconvenient and when the sports are on and it's not a good time. It may mean sharing your money, your home, counseling frantic wives and relatives. And so lesson 2025, the sharing money and home, but I'm definitely sharing my time. I'm giving my time. And there are a lot of times in which I've had to talk to family, especially when, their loved one kind of goes off the rails or relapses, and it's hard and it's heartbreaking. And I remember this was something that was always it was a lesson that I learned firsthand. It was before I was an alcoholic. I don't have the problem. My boyfriend has the problem. And if he would just sober up, I would have no problem. So I clearly didn't have alcoholism back then. So you guys can catch. I was an alcoholic. What I was living in is a magical land called denial. And I remember he had gone off on a bender. And like a good untreated Al-Anon, I called his sponsor. I'm like, you gotta do something. He's off. And I still remember what he said today, and I use it all the time because it was powerful. He said, Paige, you're the one that's calling me. You're the one that needs the help. What can I do for you? And so when I get family members, when I get people, I've been privileged to do helpline work where I answer the phones, and occasionally it's an alcoholic who needs help. Sometimes it's an alcoholic who needs directions to a meeting or where's this meeting, but a lot of times it's family members. And I'm grateful to have done some work in the Fellowship of Al-Anon, so I can say from my own experience about that fellowship and offer it in a very gentle way, which is, I know how isolating it can be to be a loved one of an alcoholic. It might be nice to go to a place with people who understand and to gently offer it. So that's just been my experience there. It may mean sharing your money, your home, counseling frantic wise relatives, innumerable, which means too many to count, trips to police courts, sanitariums, hospitals, jails, and asylums. So when we say asylums and sanitariums, rehabs, detoxes, sober living, that sort of place. And actually, we have a detox facility in Calgary. It's a medical detox. And it's called Renfrew, and I would often take people and help them get in, and for years it was put on it's an Alberta Health Services, so it's a part of our healthcare system, and so they would have their Alberta Health Services like posters on the wall, and there was one, oh God bless, I just remember this so vividly. There was a grandmother who was baking cookies with her adult son, because that'll do it, that'll fix it. But I just remember it would be like 7 a.m, because you had to get there before 8 when they did intake, and you'd have these like alcoholics shaking and vomiting, and like in every single time I'm like, I want cookies. Just every day. That was me showing up at Renfrew, and I've had to do that, and I don't mind doing that. And then when it talks about going to police courts, man, I have had a lot of fun doing that. My sponsees who were there for court seem to enjoy it less. But I do remember there was this one time I had a sponsee, and she had some charges. And I go to support her. And I've done that for a couple people. And it was kind of a bunch of us that went. We went and did a little serenity prayer before we went into the room. Again, I was having a great time. And like, she was one of the last people to go. And there was a guy who was having his thing heard. And he was one of us. And he's like, I just did the 4th step. And our little section was like, thumbs up, thumbs up, guy. We're like, yeah, quietly and respectfully. But it was this cool moment where her lawyer brought to the attention to the judge that I was her sponsor. And he's like, oh, you're her sponsor. Explain a step. Just like in the middle of court, explain a step. You don't want to get called on at a meeting and you got to share. Like it was, but I will tell you, I wanted to do step 9 because there's a joke. The joke is the judge doesn't care what step you're on. If you're in front of the judge, you're on step 9. I didn't, but I explained step 1 because I genuinely thought that could be really helpful, and I nailed that share. That was a whole lot of fun for me, and I do remember he was talking about, there's there's all these, I just remember he was talking about like, oh, there's all these problems. And he made a joke about something codependent. And I said, you know, there is a fellowship for that, sir, which I don't think you should do in court, but it landed. Anywho, and what we've taken from this little story is that if you're on trial, you're not going to invite me. Fair enough. All right. But yeah, there's times where we got to show up to hospitals. There's been times, we're going to talk about ambulances. It says so we have to deal with these things, go to court, go to rehab, go to detox, like to meet these people, to help them when they're in the psych ward, that sort of thing. The emergency room. It says your telephone may jangle at any time of the day or night. That'll happen. That'll happen. I will say, since like 2016, I've had my phone on mute. So just a heads up on that. But also, if you're worried about waking me up, you can't. But I am really available, and I got a weird sixth sense. Like there's times it'll be 3 a.m. and I'm like, why am I awake? And like somebody's like, oh, we'll better see what that's about. So it says your wife may sometimes say she is neglected. Now that is an important line. We're going to see that line grow in the chapter, The Family Afterward. And we're going to see it a little bit, of course, in Two Wives. But that idea that like we're going to be working with people, like that's the level of intensity. Now, I'm going to jump ahead. I won't bounce this around there, but there's only one place in the book that talks about the word balance. The word balance is only found in the 164 one time. And that balance is talking about balancing 12-step work, so working with others, and family commitments. That's the only place that it's talked about. And you see, if I'm not here, if I'm not recovered, I don't got to worry about balance. It does not apply to me. Because you know, when somebody is in the ICU, do you know what the doctors and nurses are not doing? They're like, you know, I think you need to find a lot of balance. You better try pickleball or something. That's not what they're doing in the ICU. It's triage. It is life-saving. If I'm here today and I have not gone through this work and I don't have that foundation of all 12 steps, I'm in triage. I don't need to worry about balance. Balance will find itself. And part of why I don't like the word balance, I do have some bias, admittedly, is because when I think of balance, I think of like a server at a restaurant and trying to balance all those different plates. But if I'm the server, where does that put me? That puts me at the center. And I know I ought not be at the center of my life. We have a wall of evidence that I ought not be at the center. There's no place worse for me to be than at the center of my life. And so what do I need? I need God at the center. So instead of being balanced, I prefer to be and to strive for God-centeredness. And if I seek where God would have me be, that balance will find itself. Alrighty. So it says, your wife may sometimes say she is neglected. A drunk may smash the furniture in your home or burn a mattress. And I'll say that happens less today, because today we often will take them to the hospital or a detox. I have had that happen, but I was also not in recovery at the time. Hey girl, I was gonna bug you if I didn't see you. I'm like, I hope she's well. I'm so glad you're here. We're on page 97. We love you. All right. It says you may have to fight with him if he is violent. No, not especially if you work with them on Zoom. You could just go end meeting. Don't gotta fight with them. No, I've only had like one time where there was anything even remotely close to that. So nope. And it says sometimes you will have to call a doctor and administer sedatives under his direction. No. Absolutely not. No, we are not doing that. We will take them to a detox where a doctor can do it. I'm not giving you sedatives. Absolutely not. But there are times where I have to call for an ambulance. There are times where I've had to call welfare checks on people. That is something that has happened a lot, especially in those early days of sponsorship. And so it says another time you may have to call for the police or ambulance. Occasionally you'll have to meet such conditions. So as powerful as it can be to work with others, there are times where it's tough. There are times where we have to call in somebody to do a welfare check or an ambulance or that sort of thing. And I've had to do that. And I've had to do that for sponsees where they didn't even live in the same city. And it's occasionally we have to do that. Because alcoholism is an ugly and a horrific illness. And there are times where I will be inconvenienced. But if I'm carrying this message and not trying to codepend and carry the alcoholic, that's an occasional thing. It doesn't happen that often. It goes on to say we seldom allow an alcoholic to live in our homes for long at a time. And here's why. It's not good for him. And it sometimes creates serious complications in a family. So again, I need to carry the message. And if people are, and again, it's not the most common thing for people to have alcoholics like live with them, because we have things like sober living and that sort of thing. But again, it's that we don't want to create false dependencies. I don't want the alcoholic to be dependent on me. I need the alcoholic to be dependent upon God. So it says, though an alcoholic does not respond, there is no reason why you should neglect his family. This paragraph, we're going to see and come back to this again and again and again in the later chapters. It says you should continue to be friendly to them. Now again, the context of this is that more often than not, in those early days, we would meet an alcoholic through the family, and the family member would connect us to them. So we would have those easy connections to the family. A little bit less so nowadays. It says you should continue to be friendly to them. This line is important. The family should be offered your way of life. Now, the way of life is these 12 steps as outlined in this book. That's what we offer them. Should they accept and practice spiritual principles? Again, the spiritual principles for me are the tangible, practical actions of the 12 steps. If they accept and do this, it says there is a much better chance that the head of the family will recover. And even though he continues to drink, the family will find life more bearable. This kicks off a theme that we're going to see. The theme that is being kicked off is the idea is if there is somebody that is hurting and that is struggling, the best thing that we could do is like work this program like our life depends on it, because it does. To be a powerful and a miraculous demonstration of this program. That is one of the best things that we can do. Now, this is not a new theme, but it is also a continuation of a theme that we have seen throughout this book. And it is a theme that ties into problems. That this is a way of life which answers, which solves all our problems. And it's a reminder that there is not a problem that I cannot bring to God. There is not a problem that I cannot bring through the 12 steps. And it might not solve the problem, but it might solve how I show up to that problem. And that's everything. That's everything. This is a way of life that works. And it's not just that I do AA over here to treat my alcoholism over here. It is a way of life, and this is how I show up to all areas of my life. And it's a sneaky little line, but it's powerful. It's powerful, and it's continuing a theme and kicking off a brand new theme. So it says, for the type of alcoholic who is able and willing to get well, little charity in the ordinary sense of the word is needed or wanted. The men who cry for money and shelter before conquering alcohol are on the wrong track. So that's what I was talking about, that idea of like, I got a plan. I need this and I need this and I just need to do this and I got to go to a gym and I got to lose this much weight and I got to make this much money and I need Mr. Right, who always ends up being Mr. Right now. And in my case, Mr. Right out of jail. I need this, I need that. That is not the order. I don't get spiritual to work the steps. I don't get well to work the steps. I work the steps to get spiritual. I work the steps. I take the steps to get well. And again, when I put the 12 steps first, everything else works out. Everything else works out. But when I try to sit in the center of my life in my little God chair, it's the delusion of the God chair, and I'm trying to fix and manage and get this, and I got to do this, and I got to get a job over here, and that'll fix it. No, I burn it to the ground, and I can burn it to the ground sober. I can burn it to the ground before I even take that first drink, which is inevitable. So, it goes on to say, the men who cry for money and shelter before conquering alcohol are on the wrong track. I have to put God, the 12 steps, I've got to put those first. And then here's that non-dual consciousness. It says, yet we do go to great extremes to provide each other with these things, with these very things, when such action is warranted. So, if you've ever heard that saying, the AA paradoxes. I don't think there's many paradoxes in AA. To be honest, I know, just so controversial today. I think there's things that we hear in the meetings which are not necessarily aligned with what's in the book. I also think a lot of the things that feel like paradoxes are instead ineffable. What I mean by that is to be experienced, to be understood. If I try to understand it intellectually, it seems like a paradox. But when I experience it, it makes perfect sense. And so when it says, this may seem inconsistent, but we think it is not, it's like, what do you mean? And what we're talking about is like, man, if somebody is giving these 12 steps their best go, they're out there and hustling amends, and they're doing their prayers, their meditation, they're working with others. Yeah, I can help them find a job. You probably don't want me to do it. I'm not good at that. But you know what I mean? Yes, I can help in those other things. But if somebody's not sitting on their 4th step, not making amends, it's not really helpful if I help them get into university. That's what we're talking about. And you can see it and you can experience it. And so often it is that we just know. You know what I mean? And the more that I do it, the more that I know. It comes from that place in my heart. So it is not the matter of giving that is in question, but when and how to give. And that's what we're talking about. Exactly that. That often makes the difference between failure and success. The minute we put our work on a service plane, which is me trying to fix, save, manage, control them, the moment we do that, the alcoholic commences to rely upon our assistance rather than upon God. And as I have demonstrated again and again in my life, I'm not a good God. I'm just not a good God. You don't want me as a God. I'm a bad God in my life. I'm a bad God in your life. I am a producer of confusion rather than harmony. We're going to joke later on in a couple chapters about I am the deliberate manufacturer of misery incorporated. I'm a misery factory. I am a bad God. And so that's not helpful. He clamors for this or that, claiming he cannot master alcohol until his material needs are cared for. No, this is what I need. I need a job. I need this. I need that. I need the relationship. I can't get sober until I find love. I can't get sober until I get a house sorted. I can't get sober until. And this is one of my favorite lines in the book. If not my favorite line in the book. It says nonsense. And some of us, we have hoodies that say nonsense on them. And somebody asked me one time, would you ever edit, if you had the power and ability to edit anything in the big book? And I was like, no, the book is the way it needs to be. But let me retract my statement. If I could go in and be one of those little elves, if I could go back in time and whisper in Bill Wilson's ear, what I would have said is, I don't think that needs a period. I think that needs an exclamation mark. Nonsense! Exclamation mark. That's what I feel like it needs. A little bit of spice on that grammar. Nonsense. That's the wrong order. Some of us have taken very hard knocks to learn this truth. Job or no job. Wife or no wife. And this is important, we simply do not stop drinking so long as we place dependence upon other people ahead of dependence upon God. And that has been my experience. Earlier, probably like a year ago with the pace that I go. We spoke about those ideas of reservations, like, we have to be free of reservations. And I spoke about examples of reservations. The first example was that I'd like to have champagne on my wedding day, or when I'm 80, I'd like to do black tar heroin. I had a sponsee that said that. And I'm like, why? Anywho, there's those reservations in regards to the allergy. Then there's also this other type of reservation, which is reservations in regards to the obsession of the mind. That I don't want to work the steps forever, or I don't want to make this amends, or I don't want to have to do inventory, or I don't want to share the secret. And that's a reservation as it pertains to the obsession of the mind. But there were some reservations that I came into the program with. And they were rooted in this idea of, if this happens to me, it will be so painful, I don't know how I will be able to go through it sober. That type of reservation. Now, I don't want to scare anyone. I really don't. And keep in mind, my experience is radically different than yours. But not all of them. But almost all of them have happened to me. Almost all of them have happened. But I'll tell you some of them. The first reservation that I had was, if I break up with my ex, Mr. Right Out of Jail, if I break up with him, I cannot do it. I cannot stay sober. There's no possible way. We broke up. Let me tell you, single, woo, that's the way to be. It was great. It was, thank goodness. So got through that. The other reservation that I had, and it was an interesting one. I was in university. And I had this, it's funny. There's somebody that was like, hey, could you talk about this? And I'm like, I don't typically talk about it. I only talk about it when I feel God making me. Making me really is what it's like, because I don't like talking about it. But we're talking about it. I don't know why. But the other reservation that I had was that if I didn't graduate university, I did really, really well in university. So it wasn't like I was going to suddenly flunk out. But if something happened and I didn't graduate university, it was like one of those, what's the point? Because I was always trying to turn this thing around. That was my swearing off. I'm turning it around. And then I'd be like trying to 180 and I'd 360 it. But there we are, back at the beginning. I'm drunk again, No, doesn't do it. That's how a circle works. Sorry, I tutored math there. And so that was one of my big reservations, is like, if anything happened. And man, so I broke up with my ex, and I was like 18 months sober. And I was at a point in my life where I want to be happy, which, that felt like the pinnacle, the best it could ever be. I want to be happy, because before then I couldn't even want to be happy, couldn't even approach that. But I broke up with my ex, and I'm like, woo, single. It is wild how much easier life is when I'm not trying to control and manage another human being in his alcoholism. Wild. And I was living life, and I was about to graduate from university. And it was 2 weeks away from graduating university. Now, I also want to contextualize this. I went to DeVry. So, if you're like, oh, she's a smarty pants, we can dial that right down. I was nominated for valedictorian, though. But again, DeVry. I'm making fun of me, not anyone else. If you went there, yeah. I was about 2 weeks away from graduating. And I worked as a tutor, and I worked in the library, and they had a staff meeting for some of the employees. And I remember I was, when you're kind of pushing yourself, and it's that final push of university or work project, is doing that final push. And I was not feeling well. And I go to the staff meeting, and I had kicked off my day with some Aleve, like naproxen, and an energy drink, and my stomach was hurting, and I was feeling a little nauseous, which I was able to figure out why I thought that was. I'm like, that'll do it. And I go to the washroom to go throw up. And what was happening was I was throwing up so violently that I couldn't stand. And in retrospect, looking back, I didn't know where I was or what was happening to me. And a friend found me and took me to the doctor, who said, go to the hospital. And that's how we know it was bad, that she was able to get me to those places. I didn't like those. And I go to the hospital, and I long story short is I ended up, after a couple tries in the hospital, and when I was first in the hospital, I was in a post-surgery unit, and I didn't know what was wrong with me. I couldn't walk. I was very, very nauseous. I was having all these neurological symptoms. I lost the ability to read. Like I could read A, B, C, D, but I had lost all my reading comprehension. I lost a huge chunk of my memories. Like I could tell you that I was an alcoholic, and I could tell you that I lived on the streets, but there was no emotion, and there was no details, and it was gone. And I'm sitting and I on the time, I'm going a little over. I didn't plan on telling this story. I'm sorry. I'll wrap it up soon. But I was in this post-surgery unit, and I was like miserable. I was not okay. I couldn't read. I didn't know what was wrong with me. And I did not know that this was going to be like the rest of my life. That happened at just after 18 months in my sobriety. I'm now I'm over 15 and a half years sober. So most of my sobriety has been spent in a wheelchair with chronic nausea. I had to learn how to read again, like those sorts of things in sobriety, which I only point out the reading again because that means I had to learn how to say anonymity in front of all of y'all twice. I don't need any sympathy, but I think that deserves a gold star. But I remember I was so angry, and I was so upset, and it didn't seem fair. And then what happened to me, I was moved to the neurological unit. And the first thing I saw was somebody that was being spoon-fed. And then what happened is my roommate, he was a man that was almost vegetative. He couldn't feed himself. He could not toilet himself. He could not adjust his own pillow. And he had been there for a long, long time. And in that moment, for the first time in my entire life, I said a prayer of gratitude. I said, thank you, God. Thank you, God, that I could make it to the bathroom by myself, the few steps to the bathroom by myself. Thank you, God. It was not easy to brush my hair, but thank you, God, I could brush my hair. Thank you, God, I could feed myself. Thank you, God, I could read the short text messages from my friends in Alcoholics Anonymous who cared about me and wanted to know how I was doing. Thank you, God. And I would love to tell you that gratitude carried me on for the rest of the, over 10 years, 13 years that it's been? Absolutely not. And there were times in my sobriety where I was dying, and I was drowning in self-pity, and I was drowning from the trauma, and I was drowning from the pain that I was in. But what happened for me is the more that I leaned in, the more freedom that I got, and the more ability that I found that I was able to use to help somebody else. I literally this morning, somebody messaged me, and I didn't know who this person was, and he's like, hey, you said you learned how to read again. What helped you? Like, nothing gets wasted here, but I've got to dive in. And so my sobriety is never, and this is what I'm ending on, I know I'm pushing it for time. My sobriety is never contingent on what is happening out here. It has nothing to do with that. It has everything to do with the connection that I have within God and my heart. And that's what it's talking about. And that's what we're going to get into in the next paragraph. Thanks for letting me share.